Good morning, everyone. Can you all hear me? Perfect. My name is Jesse Opoku-Sedu, and I'm going to moderate this session, which will explore Africa's homegrown innovation and how we can scale local solutions. I'm joined here by a distinguished panel made up of entrepreneurs building innovation across different parts of the continent. We have here Alex Daddy, who we just heard from. He's the executive chairman of KGL Group of Companies, which operates businesses across the fintech, logistics, real estate, and agricultural sectors. We also have here Rebecca Enonchon, founder and CEO of Appstick, an enterprise software company. She's a leading tech voice and was recently named in the Forbes Top 50 Most Influential Women in Africa. Please, let's hear it for her. And last but not the least, we have here Ken Griffith, co-founder and CEO of Tapi, an enterprise SaaS platform helping small businesses in Africa find and retain customers, and he's based in Nairobi. Let's hear it from him. All right, so to begin the panel, I'd like us to tackle this. Africa is home to entrepreneurial talent and innovation, and I think we've heard a lot about that since yesterday at the forum. From your perspective, what makes African homegrown innovation and solutions unique? And how do they address the local challenges in a way that global solutions do not do that? So I'd like to hear from you first, Rebecca, and then Ken.
I think there are a couple of things. First of all, we do have a unique perspective because we have, they say ingenuity is the daughter of invention, right? I'm not ingenuity. How do they say it? Necessity. And we do need everything, you know. And so we end up creating solutions. There's a startup in Cameroon called Kiro Games, and they have a gaming platform. And so they build games. And I remember one time they created this amazing innovation because they wanted to get more revenue. And they figured that they could get more revenue from the parents of the kids playing their games. And so they're like, how can they get their parents to play the game, like interact with the games? And so they created kind of a control mechanism for the parents to control the playing time of the games so that the parents could then take the, like the courses that they were charging them. And so they were trying to solve a different problem. But because of it, they were then able to create technology that prevented, like says, okay, you know, a kid can play, so the parent can decide that a kid can play for 2 hours and then has to do some testing or, you know, and so that is because they were trying to solve a problem that wasn't necessarily what they intended. And so that's part of some of our ingenuity. We see so much talent. One of the things, one of my hats is I'm the current head judge for the Africa Prize for Engineering Innovation. And so we have applicants from around the continent, across the continent, and you just see so much creativity. Last year, our winner was a South African. And you know how difficult it is to get certain medications, right? Especially for chronic illnesses, and you have to go to clinics, you know, government, usually clinics, and then stand in line. And so they created like a kiosk, and you get an SMS code when your medication is ready. You get an SMS, a text message, and then you go and put the code in, and then your medication comes out. And so it like also the stigma associated with certain illnesses. And so I think that's something, again, it's unique. It was created for Africa, but it could work around the world. And what I always encourage our entrepreneurs to do is to not just build for local. It's great, but like when Facebook was created, they didn't say, oh, we just want to address our local, you know. We need to think big. And so not just addressing local, but seeing our technology being an export commodity. And so, yeah, I have lots of stories, but I want to hear from everybody. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. I think it's a really interesting point you make about not just creating for local, but then having a very big picture in our minds so that our products, our solutions can go further. Ken, any ideas on this?
Ideas. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. No, I think as a builder, I'm on my second startup now, so I think I like pain. So yeah, I think, and I'll speak from a point of view where it's a sample of one, which is me as an entrepreneur building on the continent. And when I built my first startup, it's very unique, whereas you're trying to build infrastructure, SaaS, which is software as a service, enterprise SaaS for large businesses such as banks, mobile operators, and large retail. In other parts of the world, you build something like that, you have a team that uses it, and they're on their way. You can charge $500,000 to $1 million to do so. But there's some very unique things on the continent, right? There's a difference between consumer software and business software. Consumer software, everyone in this room probably learned how to use TikTok, Instagram, whatever the case may be, to actually run their business. If you sell enterprise software into a business, they'll call you and say, hey, could you print me that report that, I'm like, but you have the same credentials like I do, and it's a DIY. So I think there's a very interesting thing of building software and tech. It's the augmentation of human and the interface between human and tech. And I think it's encouraging because if you think about the continent as I build the second startup, where you look at SMEs, there's a huge population of unemployed, brilliant minds that you can use to augment that relationship between tech and human. And for us, what we're trying to do is call them like digital experts. How do you create this huge network of digital experts that could be augmented with the technology? Because I think there's a misconception that technology is going to solve it all, right? And also there's a misconception, whereas if you get on the internet, the magic's going to happen, not realizing that in big businesses you have teams understanding how marketing, sales, and customer success. So if you think about this augmentation of tech and human, which is very unique to the continent, I believe, right? You can actually solve larger problems when you think of economic stability, also knowledge transfer, and also builders and future builders. And I've heard a lot, Dorothy and also talk about these builders. I think if we really want to solve large-scale problems on the continent, we have to think about building a nation of builders. Right? And if we think of all the countries across Africa, if we have that mindset within education, because everyone has a degree here, right? And you're going to think about your consulting job and everything else that you go out and adapt to. But I'm thinking of, if you think about builders and building future and building the future of Africa that you want, I think the mindset changes, right? And for us, I think there's a uniqueness of the 1.4 billion consumers we have on the continent.
Fantastic. Thank you. I'm going to switch gears a bit and I want us to talk a bit about government. Mr. Daddy, in your opening remarks, I think you talked about the role of African government in catalyzing change. So in what ways can African governments work more effectively with private sector innovators to create enabling environments for scaling homegrown solutions?
Before I answer your question, I think I'll just touch on what Rebecca said. I have a slightly different perspective on growing talent or growing businesses in Africa. And I touched on it because that's fundamental to what we do. There's so much opportunity in Africa. The technology that is deployed by ourselves are not deployed. It's just technology that's deployed in the developed world. For example, we use USSD in Africa. It's not deployed here. So we have developed these systems, right? And we're using it in Ghana, we're using it in Cote d'Ivoire, we are entering Kenya. It's about 7 or 8 African countries. We can't enter England with that. We can't, because that's systems that are not used. And we are using these systems because there's no internet penetration in local areas. That's why you see revolution in mobile banking technology and that, because those systems have been developed by Africans for Africa. So there's huge opportunity there that we have to satisfy those opportunities. I mentioned one about the fishing sector, right? The technology that we are deploying there, I would say to some extent will be a little bit obsolete or not needed here, specific to developed world and that. So that's where I beg to differ a bit. Then coming back to your question.
Which is about how government can work with private sectors to sort of scale a lot of these local innovations.
We do the same thing, like I mentioned about the NLA, National Lottery Authority. We work closely with government. Government tends to be very inefficient. We always talk about public-private partnership. I've added another P. In Ghana, we have also what I term the political service. So political, public-private. And one of the most inefficient parts is the political service, followed by the public service. Then we have the private service and that. Unfortunately, there's not that much dialogue between, especially the political service and private sector. There's the lip service of the private sector being an engine of growth and that. But even for top companies like ourselves, leading companies like ourselves, sometimes there isn't collaboration. There isn't also discussions and that between ourselves and government with regard to policy. It's changing a bit. I think government could do a bit more in engaging market leaders and before certain policies and that.
Can you please expand on what you mean by political service?
Political service is a bit controversial, but when I was growing up in Ghana, you had a public service that was that employed technocrats by merit. It has totally changed now. I see multi-billion-dollar state organizations run by political operatives. How can, in my company, right, I wouldn't employ some of these political operatives as assistant managers, right? Then you see these organizations, right? They are not political organizations. They are business organizations. I don't mind these political operators operating in the political sphere, like the ministries and that, because they are supported, even here in England, they are supported by the civil service. So you have civil servants supporting them. But you throw a political operator in an organization, a billion-dollar organization, to be a CEO, he's not supported by anyone. The buck stops with him. He has to make the decisions. And that is why, and because Africa also has most of the commercial activities centered around government. So you can see that where activities are centered around an inefficient system, the system doesn't work. So that's what I mean by political service, which is probably one of the biggest services in the space.
Thank you very much. And Rebecca, if you could please share any views on how government can work closely with private sector too.
I mean, just stay out of the way. We don't have a lot. Just stay out of the way. I think they think they want to support, and even when they're well-intentioned, right? Even when they want to, they actually harm us more than they do. Recently, a few years ago, Cameroon took a $100 million loan from the World Bank to support our digital economy. Now, those of us on the ground, we haven't seen any of this money. We don't know what they did with the money or what they're doing. But so the government says, oh, we want to support digital economy. And so therefore, we're going to borrow money to push and harness that community. And then they create all sorts of rules and regulations and taxes that harm the same digital economy. And they do it, why? Because they have to reimburse that loan, right? So they take, I mean, so it's not just a net zero, it's a net minus because it really kills innovation. I know that you're in betting. You have the platform, and so you're creating. So they've added, just in Cameroon, in the last month or so, they've added a new platform for betting, for betting transactions. And one minister just woke up one day and decided, I'm going to, and not the finance minister, that I'm going to control betting revenue, not the betting. You can bet as much as you want, but I want to see some of that revenue. And so there's this new platform that they created, and that's basically adding 7% to all transactions. And then you have to comply, and you had 10 days to comply. And so you're adding a new tax. And this affected not just the betting companies, but it affects the fintechs. Why? Because a lot of the fintechs actually earn money on the betting transactions, and that allows them to support the rest of their customer base. Also, you have the gaming community, right? So they said in French, jeu and games is the same, right? So betting and games are the same. And so the gaming startups also got this new tax. And so we just want government to stay out of the way. And no more government initiatives on tech. We don't need it. Don't do anything. Just leave us alone. That's it. And if you could leave that economy alone and not try to control it so much, it would thrive.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your answer. So for the next couple of questions, I'm going to direct it to specific panelists. So the first one is to you, Ken. So Africa has largely been on the sidelines of the global AI conversation. With TAPI, you are leveraging AI to support small and medium-sized businesses in Africa. What steps can African innovators, businesses, and policymakers take to ensure the continent is not just a consumer of AI, but an active participant in shaping its future?
So I actually want to comment on the government question quickly before I get into. I think I'm born on a small island in the Caribbean called Montserrat. My dad's from Barbados, so I have the privilege to be ignorant to government where I build. And actually that's been an advantage for me because I keep my head down and I build. And something I'm actually learning from this is the fact that I think education has a big part, or the education system has a big part to play within this whole change. As far as, because growing up in the Caribbean, same education system as in Africa. You're taught how to actually really be good at tests and really know the system and know how things work. I think we need to go to the next level by knowing how things work so you can build the future of things work, right? And I think that if the education system for entrepreneurship is to be changed, right? Whereas in school, you're actually taught how to build and how to actually drive entrepreneurship, that would change things dramatically, right? So you don't have people waiting on government, because there's a lot of conversation about government. If we wait, it's not going to happen. So I think from being ignorant to how governments work on the continent, it's an advantage for me, because I'm not waiting, right? So I'm just also projecting my desire for everyone in the room to actually not wait. Let's actually build. So coming back to the AI thing, which I think is converging to what I said as far as the topic of AI. AI, obviously everyone knows how AI works. They're based on data, they're based on models. If I ask you in this room, where are we going to get the data from on the continent to build our own AI models? It's a big problem. It's a huge problem. So we have biases, we have hallucination, right? And hallucination is when things just go out of whack, right? It gives you crazy answers that don't make sense. But the consumer behavior is changing. If I ask a show of hands as far as who uses OpenAI Perplexity versus Google, right, what is your weighted distribution? Do you use it 50-50%, 60-40? What do you use for search now? OpenAI? Right? And then some Google, right? So if you think about your behavior, you're changing, and we call it lazy search, right? You're being lazy. Because you have other things to do, right? Right? So you're like, just give me an answer so I can go. So now think of you on the continent searching using lazy search, and the data that you get is hallucinating. And you as a consumer, you're going to make a decision on that data. That's a problem, right? So if we're not building the data assets for these LLMs and these tools, we're going to have a bigger problem. So you think the delta is here is actually increasing. So obviously, I'm going to come back in the shell of a TAPI of what we're doing is the fact that all these small businesses, they've been locked out of the largest economy in the world, which is the internet. Over 12 trillion US dollars. That's the commerce engine of the world. And if we don't build tools and get them there so they could be found and be searched and be discovered, that delta is going to change and change and change. So now you have a traditional, so we're looking at an old problem with new variables, where everyone was going on the internet, right, from your brick and mortar, but things actually were a bit static. AI has changed that, right? So now you have these small businesses, all these tools, all the complexity, and everything else trying to actually win on the internet. If you don't actually organize the right data for these small businesses, they're not going to be found. So you're going to have a huge gap of invisible businesses, and consumers are going to be adapting to a global business. So the problem is exacerbated. All right, so for us, we really need to think hard on how do we actually get the data assets we need, own the data assets we need, and build the tools we need to change the face of the internet. And 1.4 billion consumers, they're transacting. M-Pesa, 56 billion US dollars worth of transactions. That doesn't show up on the internet. That's a commerce graph of a country like Kenya. So I think we have a lot of work to do. But I think also it's a huge opportunity for us to build the future we want.
Thank you very much, Ken. All I hear is opportunity for us to build here. And shifting to you, Mr. Dade, you've been a strong advocate for the inclusion of Ghanaian diaspora in the country's political and socio-economic transformation, leading initiatives like the Ghana Diaspora Homecoming Summit and the Ghana Investment Opportunity Summit in the UK. Why is this a key priority for you, and how can Africans in the diaspora play a more active role in fostering and scaling homegrown solutions on the continent?
Well, I think all my life in investment promotion, I happen to also be the outgoing chairman of the Ghana Investment Promotion Center, the IPA of the country. And I focused mainly on diaspora investment. And I had a mantra that said that we prefer diaspora direct investment to foreign direct investment and ODA. Why do I say that? On the continent, we have remittances. When I take only remittances, officially from the World Bank source, it's about over $100 billion in remittances. When I take ODA and FDI, which basically we work so hard at the Investment Promotion Center, giving incentives and everything, right? And presidents traveling around and everything. FDI is about 50 billion. And we set up offices. We go around the world, presidents and that. We don't go around the world for our diasporans. They remit straight to the countries, right? So both FDI and ODA, it's less than 90, I think it's something like 80 billion. And those ones that we get over 100 billion, we don't concentrate on. So I believe that governments should set diasporan policies to attract our diasporans in. And these funds that are remitted also goes into consumption. So there's no structure with it. So we're looking at models that we can channel those ones into investment. One thing about diaspora investment and remittances and that going in is that they are a stable way of funding. When you look at FDI flies when the country, like my own country, Ghana, had to go to the IMF for restructuring and that, the flows died down. We saw that our GIPC was reduced by about 80%. But diaspora investment continued to go in because the motive of a diaspora remitted is very different from foreign direct investment where it just follows profits. So that's one of the reasons why myself having lived in England, I think I was here for 25 years before I went. I still got businesses back in England, so I still got part of the family here. So when I look at people like myself, what I achieve, whatever I've achieved in Ghana is because of what I achieved here, right? Whether it's the technology, my partners, our partners that I worked with here, the funding, where in Ghana they borrow at exorbitant rates. I do borrow from that market. So these are what the diasporans can. That's why I concentrate on diasporan investment. In terms of also, one of the philosophies I hold is that the diasporans like myself can create, we need also huge African conglomerate. I think the last speaker spoke about companies like these giants in India, Tata in India, and that. We need those conglomerates. In Ghana, what we have done as a group is that one of our companies, KGL Capital, has set up a $100 million private equity fund, right, to fund startups, to fund companies that need funding. And these, so what we need as companies like these, right, purposely created or helped by governments so that they can bring the others with them. So those are some of the things that I believe we need to do.
Thank you very much. And to you, Rebecca, through your work with AfriLabs, Venture Capital for Africa, and the African Business Angels Network, you have a broad perspective on the African startup ecosystem. In your experience, what key factors distinguish the businesses that successfully scale from those that struggle to break through?
Wow. Okay. So some of it, some of the differences, and just so so ABAN is the African Business Angels Network, which we created in 2014, really just to be able to support early stage startups across the continent. AfriLabs is a network of tech hubs. We started in 2011 with 6 hubs across, it was 6 hubs across 5 countries. And today we have over 500 member hubs across 53 different African countries. It just really shows how the whole community, the tech community, has grown and developed over those years. And so the things that we see most difficult, I think, for technology entrepreneurs or startups, tech startups, would be not necessarily funding, although it's a challenge, but the environment, right? Because startups are businesses. They're businesses, and their intention is not to stay as SMEs. So we have a business environment in many of our African countries that's very negative, very difficult. A lot of corruption, a lot of bureaucracy, just a lot of challenges for any business. And so when you then take that to the startup that needs to work very, very fast, right? You need to move. And then you're in this very static, unstable environment for businesses. And I think that there's this perception that government officials have that startups are where we send young people that we can't find jobs for, right? So, you know, like they all have this thing about, oh, entrepreneurship, go be an entrepreneur. Basically, they're asking people to be self-employed, but they don't understand what a startup really is. A startup is meant to be a multinational. It's meant to be huge. It's meant to scale. And so because of the environment, and until our governments start to identify and recognize that startups are tech startups and innovation is an industry, and start respecting it as an industry and investing in that sector as an industry, I think, you know, those startups will always have those challenges. I always say that to be an entrepreneur, you have to be crazy, but to be an African entrepreneur, you have to be raving mad.
I couldn't agree more with that. As much as we've talked about developing homegrown solutions, I think collaboration is really key to scaling impact. So how can African entrepreneurs better engage with global investors and corporates? And the challenge is, and how do they do this while maintaining local ownership and control over their innovations? I'd like everyone to have a go at this. Very brief. I want to have time for questions from the audience as well. Ken Phil.
So the question is, how do you have ownership, but also look at partnerships and global? Exactly. Yeah. I think, as you say, founders on the continent, they're lunatics, right? I mean, I'm part of it, all right? And I think it's because you're motivated by something totally different, and it's bigger than yourself. And typically those things are bigger than an individual company can do. And you have to think about partnerships, right? And partnerships are huge because you have to move together, right? I mean, that's the whole point of this, right? Silicon Valley, despite that, you have these big giants, I mean, they used to trade their employees, right? I mean, people used to carry things back from being employed at Facebook, going to Google, from Google, and so forth, right? So I think it's important to actually have partnerships. I think for what we do, our distribution channel, we when we built our first startup, everything was product market fit. And I think what we've done right now is think of GTMF. We call it go-to-market fit. And that means that who you're partnering with, where you're going to actually get your customer, right? And how large you can scale. And that means that your heuristics of making decisions change, right? Because you're trying to figure out exactly, do they have the same mission as I do? What is the vision of this partner? And also, if you think about globally, what we do is actually really changing the way how the internet is structured. And we think that can actually be outside of Africa as well. But coming back to, and I think from the funding observation you made, is, sometimes as a second-time founder, I push against the grain because, we think of unit economics as SMEs, right? If you think of an investor investing in Google and ask them, what's your unit economics? Do you think we would have a Google today? Right? And I think, if you think about the continent, we need to start thinking about that, right? How do we think about these huge behemoth businesses that become global businesses, right? And that's not going to be done as individuals. We have to think about building an ecosystem that makes it happen, right? And, obviously making sure that you're owning a piece of that and you're not giving it away.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Rebecca?
Okay, so I love working in partnerships. I really believe in an African community. I really believe in working together, and I'm really proud of the fact that I was a co-founder of ABAN and a co-founder of AfriLabs through Active Spaces. And so what we did is we created a platform so that those two organizations, both Pan-African, one funding startups, the other supporting startups, could work together. And we created something called Catalytic Africa. And Catalytic Africa is a matching investment fund. And so, an angel investor that puts money in a startup, an angel investor that's in an ABAN network, that puts money in a startup that's in an AfriLabs member hub, we take that and we double or triple it up to 60,000 euro. Or dollars, depending on. And what we found was that what we're trying to do is promote investment from Africans into Africans. Angel investing is very local. And when a startup is created, it's really great that the investor is there. They understand the environment. So if we're only going after money that's coming from the outside, they don't really understand the concept. The context. And so we really are trying to find really innovative ways of funding, of encouraging local funding. And so, this catalytic fund is like a multiplier effect to support not just the startup that end up with, most of the money, but also the angel investor that sees their investment multiplied. And so I'm going to make sure that I talk to Dorothy before we go, because we raised about 1.5 million euro for the first fund, and we've already dispersed it. And so now we need more money to replenish. But I also encourage all of you that are in the diaspora, put money into startups. You will lose it, most of it. But you could also, yeah, I mean, that's the truth, but that's the truth also in Silicon Valley, right? It's not just, you know, I don't know why, like, it's so many times and when we want to invest, like our high net worth individuals in Africa are so conservative. Like, they're so conservative, they want to invest in things they can see, right? And so it's very difficult to see them to get them to invest, right? Angel investors and so on and so forth. So most of the angel investors on the continent, and that is such a growing community. You know, there were just a few years ago. Today there are so many, there are thousands and thousands of them, and we need to find a way to encourage them. But also I encourage all of you, you don't have to be rich, right? Like in Cameroon Angels Network, the minimum investment is 1 million francs, which is $2,000, right? A year. And that's it. Like, come on, you know, you can find that. And it really does help the startups. It really does help. And it helps, as he said, to structure the ecosystem, right? So to be in an angel network. So you're in the diaspora, you may not see and be close to the startup to do like some of the due diligence, but you have angel groups across the continent. Join one, even though you're overseas. I know that we have some people here that are in Cameroon Angels Network. Christian, where are you? Even though they're living overseas. And so that it kind of de-risks a little bit your investment.
Much. I can very much relate to that. Full disclosure, Ken and I were talking about it. I ran an angel syndicate that basically pulls money from young African professionals in the diaspora, and we invest in startups across Africa. So I hear you there.
And is Joe here? He's also a board member of ABAN.
We need to connect with him afterwards. Anyway, Mr. Daddy, any thoughts on our collaboration?
Yeah, I have three things I want to mention briefly. One is talking about startups. I believe that Africa is in a continuous mode of startups. Why? Because we have a vision, myself personally, to set up businesses that outlive the visionary. That's what we set up to do. And how do you do that? In my company, what we've done is we've put in strong corporate governance structures. If my children want to come into the company, that's fine. If they don't want to come in, the company grows and goes on. Africa has got so many companies that never end up anywhere. The visionary dies, it starts again. 80% of businesses, unlike here, 200-300-year-olds. So that's one of the problems that we have in Africa. Businesses that don't outlive their visionaries. So that's a huge problem we have to solve. And then thank you. And then we talk about partnerships. I've got my partners here. Henry is here. It's alignment of interest. Simple alignment of interest. What are they in Africa for? They are in Africa, obviously, to make some money, right? What do they need? They need credible partners. Sometimes it's very difficult to find credible partners in Africa, right? And if they did, they probably don't have much equity to put in. So those are things that we would have to look at when we look at interest, globalization versus homegrown. One other thing, what I talked about was, that's a topic that will probably take a bit of time, but I'll touch on it. When we talk about adding value to some of the products, I've come to the realization, without any scientific but I've come to the realization that, for example, I talk about cocoa board in Ghana, exporting raw cocoa beans, and everyone is on their back to add value to it. If you added value and you produce these chocolates in Ghana, the EU will find reasons why you shouldn't come here. They will. Whatever you do, there will be sub-reason. The banana is a little bit this and that, right? So my solution to it, having lived in England for that period, for that length of time, I don't believe that there are barriers to setting up factories in England. What stops some of these ones exporting coffee, cocoa and that, they could partake in the industry here. They could be part of the Nestle's, the Cadbury's and that. And the money they earn from that, they can repatriate like the conglomerates do in Africa. And this model, I believe, has been tested by the Middle Eastern countries. They weren't just sending the oil. Saudis and the Emiratis own a lot of properties or businesses in the developed world. So we cannot continue with a model which says that produce these ones and they put barriers on, or the chocolate has X whatever in it, chemical, this, that. Come and produce it in the UK. Go and produce it in Switzerland. Produce them in those countries. And I can bet you that with about $2, $3, $4, $5 million, right, your return will be better than the cocoa you export to these places. So that's another model that we have to look at.
Thank you very much. In the interest of time, we will not be able to. I'm going to make an exception for one or two questions. The lady there first, and I'll take only two questions, and the gentleman over here.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for the panel session. So, my name's Fozia Ahmed Idris. I'm co-founder of Legacy Link, a UK-based service firm focused on bridging the trust gap between Nigerian diaspora customers and vendors back home. Today you've highlighted the importance of supporting diaspora investment, which is at the heart of what we do. While many of us in the diaspora are eager to invest, trust, security and infrastructure remain major barriers. In your experience, what key steps should be prioritised by the private sector players like ourselves and policymakers to create a more reliable and scalable investment environment for diasporas? Additionally, So trust is not just a diaspora concern, it's a global one. How can we position Africa as a trustworthy investment destination on the world stage, and what fundamental changes are needed to shift the global perception of doing business in Africa? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And second question, and let's make it brief, please.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you very much for the session. My name is Shokbe, and I work in a bank in London, but I graduated bachelor's from Obafemi Awolowo University last year. And my question is a very honest question. I want to talk about building builders. Now, talking about value investing, right? We have, private equity, venture capital, angel investing, but there's a point where we're not talking about, right, investing in ideas and capacity. I graduated last year, and the average cost of a laptop right now is about 160,000 naira. And my mom's salary is 160,000 naira, right? So a lot of my peers can't afford laptops, right? And we go into conversations, and these guys are thinking, like, people are thinking. Now, secondly, right, think about not just laptops. Not everyone wants to go into tech. I totally believe that not every startup is a tech startup, right? There are ideas which are products and very amazing stuff. Now, secondly, books, right? I work with Career Impact now, where we started something recently where we are working. We work 9 to 5, and we can't read a lot of books. We are getting students, undergraduates, to read books for us, right? So investing in ideas, like even if they don't have the ideas, we are helping them think. We are getting books for them. To give numbers to it, right? The cost of the average cost of a book is about 5,000 naira. An average student earns or gets pocket money 20,000 naira. That's a quarter of their pocket money, and there's a lot. Nigeria's inflation is running riot, right? So, can we, how do you think about investing in ideas and capacity, especially at the very grassroots level, and how do you think we can rethink this model? Yeah.
Thank you very much. So I'd like for us to keep the answers very brief. Maybe I'll start with Kenford, and then we go this way and we conclude. Very brief.
I'll just answer to your question. I don't know about, I think you guys, quickly. I think you're doing it, right? Just invest in ideas, people you trust. At the end of the day, you're going to lose your money, right? You will lose your money, but it's the people that you trust who are genuine builders that you can say, okay, you know what? If I lose my money, at least I know what they're building. and they understand that they're problem solver. And I think it's kind of a hard thing to calibrate, but I think it's as simple as that.
What you're talking about is love money, right? And so in the developed countries, it comes from your family members, but they don't have it. And so that's why hubs, innovation centers in Africa are so critical, is because they are the garage of tech entrepreneurs, or of entrepreneurs. And I say tech because that is the most scalable type of business. Small SMEs are wonderful, and we need them, but they take a different trajectory, right? And so that love money a lot of times comes from your local hubs, and there are hundreds of them. Through the AfriLabs network, we support over 2 million entrepreneurs. And it's love money, it's internet access, it's office space, it's all sorts of other support that you would get from a mentor here, or that you would get from your family members that you don't have. And so that's why hubs are so critical in our environment. On the investment question, how to build that trust, I think, as I mentioned earlier, is collaborate with local investors. Right? We now have over 60 networks, angel investment networks, that are members of AMAN. And so there are certain requirements. It's very structured. And so co-invest with local investors. Find deals. We do, every quarter, we do a deal, at least a deal, right? And so we have a number of startups that will pitch, and then we'll decide which of those we want to co-invest in. And the co-investment is local investors with, and so if I'm taking my money, very hard-earned money, and putting into a startup, it really does provide some level of trust for those they can't see and touch the startup, and it gives them some kind of trust level. But again, investment is very risky, especially in startups, and everybody should realize that. It can also pay off, right? We know this Paystack story in Nigeria, where some investors put in $5,000 and got $2 million, right, when they exited. And so there are possibilities. Those are people I know, so I know those numbers for a fact. So there's an upside to it, but it is very risky.
Thank you very much. We are out of time now, so we'll end it here. Thank you so much for your audience, and thanks to my panelists.